everybody. This is Pep from Copytest Inc. And I'm here with Allison Dickin, who's the head of user research at UserLeap. She's got deep expertise in quantitative and qualitative research methods. And she's going to talk about how to use iterative learning to drive website conversion. Allison, take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today to be talking about this topic. Just a little context on me. Like you said, my name is Allison Dickin. I'm the head of user research at UserLeap, but I've been doing research one kind or another for my whole career, a little over 15 years at this point. I got started in more on the marketing research side, and then later moved over to more of the UX research side, and now I kind of do a little of everything. One thing I've seen throughout my career is just the challenge of getting the deep qualitative insights that are so valuable to understanding your audience or your users or whatever the case may be at the speed that teams are moving. Everything is just moving faster and faster these days, and product development, website changes, marketing strategies are all moving just as quickly. And so that's one of the reasons I was really excited to join UserLeap, was to be able to kind of work on solving this problem. And the way UserLeap does this, although this is a framework that you can apply with any other tool you have, is through doing iterative in-product micro surveys. So in this case, you'd be using quick surveys within your website or marketing page to be able to understand your users, the people who are visiting your page, and be able to learn really quickly and iteratively to be able to act on those insights and move on to improve your messaging. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that throughout this for the next few minutes, using an example from one of our customers at UserLeap, specifically Nova Credit. So Nova Credit is a fintech company. They do a pretty interesting thing. They help new immigrants to the United States build their credit by making them eligible or helping them to apply for and get accepted for credit cards in the United States. This is something I didn't know before I worked with them, but when you are a new immigrant to the United States, no matter what kind of credit history you have in your home country, until Nova Credit came along, once you moved to the United States, you were kind of starting from scratch. And so it could be really difficult to apply for a loan or get an apartment or whatever it might be. And so Nova Credit comes in to fill the gap there. But they're talking to a very unique and hard to reach audience. And they were seeing that they were getting traffic to their website. They had a pretty sophisticated content operation. So they were getting traffic to their website, but they weren't converting at the rate that they were hoping to see. And they really wanted to be, they needed to be able to understand their users, their visitors better, but they didn't have tools. They hadn't done other forms of audience research. So really what they were dealing with was Google Analytics. So this is just a random screenshot. It's not theirs. But the point is they were looking at this data of what's going on in their website, and they weren't able to draw any more connections between what they were seeing, why users weren't converting, and what was the underlying reason for that. And so we started them with their first in-product survey that was launched on their homepage. And the survey was really asking, how likely are you to apply for a credit card in the US in the next 3 months? And then what might hold you back from doing so with Nova Credit? And so this was a survey. With in-product surveys, you really have to be really careful, or not careful, but thoughtful about who you're targeting and when you're targeting them. It's actually more complicated later in the user journey when you're dealing with product interactions and feature usage and things like that. On a homepage or a marketing site, you generally just want to make sure that users have been there long enough to get the lay of the land, see if they're understanding what they're there to understand, but haven't converted yet. And so that's who we targeted on this for this particular survey, people who've seen 2 or more pages during their visit and had been on the page for about 15 seconds. And then we asked them these really simple questions. And what Nova Credit learned was that users were kind of in that target audience. They were likely to apply for a credit card in the next few months. Most of them were. But they didn't learn anything really specific to Nova Credit through the open-ended question. And at UserLeap, we generally really recommend and rely heavily on open-ended feedback, especially within product surveys. Like you can target the right users at the right time with the right question, you can get really, really valuable feedback from open-ends. It is a little harder on the marketing site though, where users are anonymous and they haven't committed, they have less invested in your product or service. So they are a little bit less likely to provide open-ended feedback there. But the other thing is when you launch a survey and you get open-ended questions that aren't that helpful, it often means you're asking the wrong question or targeting users at a point that they aren't at in the user journey. And so because these surveys are so quick to spin up and run iteratively, we're able to kind of take a step back and think a little bit broader and focus beyond just that conversion event of sign up and figuring out what's actually bringing users to the site, what are their goals, are they even the right people, are they reaching the audience that they wanted to reach? And so we ran a few more surveys. So the next survey that Nova Credit ran was looking at just what people's goals were for their visit. Were they coming to take advantage of Nova Credit's offering, or were they coming for some other reason? And these answer choices here, it's just a simple multiple choice question, but you can see the answer choices are very specific to Nova Credit. But the idea, or what they were able to learn from this question, is that a lot of people were visiting for other things. They were looking, a lot of it was related to the content that Nova Credit was putting out for new immigrants. So they were attracted to those topics, but it wasn't specific to applying for credit cards or doing exactly what Nova Credit was offering or trying to encourage users to do. And so we saw that people were kind of in the relevant target audience, wanting to understand or coming for relevant reasons, but they weren't actually moving forward. So Nova Credit wanted to do one last check to make sure that they really truly were attracting the right audience. And so we launched a third survey. And this was asking what country the visitors came from and whether they had received or whether they had a credit card or a loan in a previous country. And this was really to establish whether they were, we kind of understood that they were immigrants, but were they immigrants that Nova Credit was capable of serving? And so again, we learned from this survey that they were generally, by and large, people were coming from the right countries, did have credit in their home country. So they really were the right audience, the people that Nova Credit wanted to serve, and they really just still, weren't converting at the rate Nova was looking for. So we did one last survey, and this turned out to really be the point that kind of broke it open for them, where we kind of just took a step back from everything and just said, hey, did you know that Nova Credit offers credit cards for non-US citizens? Did you, are people even aware of what Nova's doing even while they're on the site? And secondly, again, going back to what those barriers might be, but this time rather than that straight open end, we used a closed-ended question, and we put in a couple of options based on what we'd learned from previous surveys and things that Nova Credit already kind of knew from the research that they'd done internally. And I'll show you some of the results from this survey. I took up the numbers, but what you can see is that, first of all, most users did not at all understand what, most of the visitors didn't understand that Nova Credit provided these specific services. And then beyond that, the barriers, the primary barrier wasn't something like trust, which was definitely a concern for the team there because, it's a fintech, it's a financial services company. We're dealing with a kind of vulnerable population. So that was a big concern. But actually, the biggest barrier for visitors was that people just didn't know how to take advantage of the services. They weren't sure what do they have to do in order to get a credit card through Nova Credit. And so this was really, really eye-opening for the team there. They realized, they had the right audience right there, on their site. They were looking for the services that Nova Credit provided, and they just didn't know how to move forward. And so this was really a big finding for them. And they were able to take a step back and ended up really redesigning their entire marketing site. They went from a version that was really focused on the big picture vision of what Nova Credit was trying to accomplish, and then making it much more specific to what they want people to do when they're on the site today. They also built out country-specific pages so that if you were an immigrant from Australia, for example, you could come to that site, to that page and see exactly what the process was to move forward with Nova Credit to get that credit card for immigrants from that specific country. And they saw really amazing results. They saw a 7% increase in homepage conversion that was sustained over time. So this was a really big change for them. And it all came through these insights from the surveys that we were able to launch, in context with real visitors and quickly iterate them. So those 4, I think it was, surveys that I just showed were launched over a period of no more than a couple of weeks. And then, they were able to quickly pivot from those learnings, redesign the website, and launch this again within, another relatively short period of time, and see this big change. So it really was super valuable to be able to launch with those visitors exactly, where they were at the right point in their experience. So in terms of thinking about how you could potentially use these similar approach to understand your visitor, just a couple of things to think about. One is just thinking about how are you obtaining your qualitative insights today. So doing surveys and other methodologies that are out of context is super valuable and something that everybody should be doing at various stages in the process of understanding your audience. But it's really, really important to be able to take it one step further and actually get the actual users who are on your site evaluating your product in real time. And if you're just relying on analytics for that information, you may be missing some really critical pieces of insight. Secondly, when you're thinking about customers and the questions that you're asking your customers, really try and focus on where they are in your journey and question any assumption you might be making at all. So if you really just focus on that conversion event alone, you may be missing a bigger picture about, do they even understand what your company does, for example? So just thinking about where they might be in the journey and where they're coming from, the various reasons they might be on your site after all. And then finally, the ability to kind of run these surveys and iterate quickly is really valuable, to be able to run these types of micro surveys continuously, because you're able to dig deeper on learning. If you find something interesting from the first survey, or maybe the first one doesn't work out, you can quickly spin up a new survey and kind of dig deeper until you get to that aha moment that really gives you the insight you need to make a bigger change that's going to move forward on conversion. And you can also continue to iterate after you launch the new survey, the new version or the new message, whatever it might be. Being able to see how it's working, but also understand the user experience, whether users are understanding the messaging, whether they're getting the information they need when they're on your homepage or marketing site. And that's it. So I'd love to hear any questions.
Thank you very much. My first question is, what kind of response rate do you see on those surveys, and how do you improve that?
Yeah, response rates are definitely something I could talk about for a long time. So for a user who's already created an account and who's kind of active, but once they're beyond conversion, you'll see much higher response rates through in-product surveys than you would get via email. So our customers get it probably on average about a 30% response rate. Now on the marketing site, where you're really trying to understand your audience, you're going to have a lower response rate because people simply aren't as invested. So you can still see, I would say probably you get around a 5% response rate, sometimes up to 10% response rate. So you have to, definitely ask more users to get the answers that you need, but you can still get a decent response rate there, and you are, again, getting users in the moment. Ways of optimizing it are really, making sure you're targeting them at the right time where they know enough or understand enough about what you're offering to be able to answer a question about it. Also trying not to bombard them as soon as they land on the page. So even if they don't need any information to answer the question that you're asking, they still, if somebody gets a survey the second they land on the page, they're much more likely to just close it out without even reading it. And then really just simplify your language and simplify it more and simplify it more. Like, what's the easiest, simplest, most straightforward way to ask your question? The fewest and smallest words, just make people have to think as little as possible. So it's really kind of basic usability for your survey.
Mm-hmm. Do you start with a yes and no question and then ask for clarifications, or?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. We tend to recommend starting with, it could be a yes or a no, or just a simple, like a 5-point rating scale. or something where it's a really easy to answer, especially if you're looking to get open-ended feedback. It's really almost never a good idea to start with an open-ended question because that requires the most thinking of all. So really, it's a good idea to start with something that people can answer without even having to think about it.
Gotcha, yeah. Mohammed here is asking about survivorship bias. So when we survey customers, there is survivorship bias. How do you reduce that effect of it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think part of that is making the questions kind of what we were just talking about, making things as simple as possible and just reducing the barrier to entry as much as possible. Really, again, about targeting and getting users at the right time. So the things that are going to increase your response rates are also going to help you, prevent bias from creeping in from the kind of
right. So if you get more people to take your survey,
yeah,
the weird opinions are less prevalent. Yeah. So how many responses should we get in before we start making conclusions?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. So we usually will look at kind of a calculation for statistical significance. There's something that's built into Usually, but you can Google a calculator on the internet and find anything. That'll you put in kind of your population of visitors, so how many people are visiting the site in an average month, and the confidence interval you want, and that'll give you an estimate. The funny thing is, if you use that, no matter how big your audience is, it always kind of tops out around 385. So something to do with the magic of statistics. So that you want as many as you can if you, but once your audience is as large as possible, around between 350 and 400 is really the most that you need. And honestly, what we see is even at a much smaller level, like once you have 50 responses or so, the themes and the trends that you see don't tend to vary really widely. So, fewer responses is still useful, and still, you can use those directional if your audience is smaller.
Do you ever connect the qualitative data that you get with web analytics, so we can see that people who don't know we offer credit cards, we can see what they were doing on our website and so on?
Yeah, definitely. We will often look at, especially in a case like this where you're looking around a conversion event, you could see the users who took the survey, whether or not they end up converting. So you can start to see, and this is, again, something that I'm sure could be done without Usually, but it's part of the platform. But you can look at people who took the survey and didn't convert versus those that did, and then start to look at, well, what are the themes or the challenges that might be relevant to those who didn't convert, and how do you start to dig in further on those? And then similarly, how do you play up the things that worked for those who did?
Thank you very much, Allison. Guys, check out userleap.com and see you around.
Thanks, everyone.